All right. Hi, I'm Rennie McPherson. Thank you to Ish Boyle, first of all, for coming up with the Marines in Tech idea 3 years ago, which we've now evolved to Veterans in Tech.
Both those Marines are here.
Both of those Marines are here. They're here.
Two people who aren't Marines.
We're doing better.
That's right.
And thanks a lot to Art Carell, another Marine Corps vet, who's hosting us tonight at Fiscal Note headquarters, this beautiful office space. And thanks to those of us who are, or those of you who are coming here to help educate us on growing the top line, which everyone can relate to and needs. And thank you too to my firm, Brown Advisory. A couple of us are here tonight, so glad that Brown Advisory is sponsoring now our second Veterans in Tech event. So I'll turn it over to Arthur to interview these distinguished panelists.
Yes, thank you very much, Rennie. And interview is right. If someone would have told me 5 years ago that I'd be moderating a panel on revenue growth, I would have definitely laughed, because I have an attorney background. Pre-Marine Corps, I was in the corporate law world. And I don't know if there's any lawyers out there, but you always kind of, you view business development and sales and revenue with a bit of an arched eye, right? It's like, I'm above that. I'm an attorney. Until you then realize that, wait a second, somebody's got to pay the bills. And oh, by the way, 2008 happened, so most law firms are hurting anyway. And then for me personally, joining Fiscal Note, coming out of the Marine Corps, when we were in slightly smaller digs than this, and just about half a dozen people, learning about the incredible technology and getting to see this very interesting market that we're in. Regardless of that, the biggest takeaway I had was just how incredible the profession of sales and revenue growth can really be. And that was one of the things I've always been most impressed by, and continue to this day to stay very involved with, is this challenge of growing a business, right? Truly creating value, which, coming from a Marine background, having that kind of immediate feedback loop of unless someone's buying what you're selling, you're probably not doing something right, And so having that kind of feedback from the market's been very cool. And watching professionals do it and how they do it has been an incredible learning experience for me. And so I'm very happy and fortunate to be in the midst of three people who have done this and done it well, and have done it for some time. And interestingly enough, thankfully, coming at it from slightly different perspectives. Obviously, a lot of us share that military veteran perspective, but we have Al over here coming from the SOCOM background. We have Andrew here coming at it from USAF, an academy grad, no less. And Anna, not just Army, but Army Aviation. She may not mention this, but the first female door gunner in combat overseas. Very, very cool. I'm going to turn it over to them to do the brief intros of their background. But again, very lucky to be here with you all, and looking forward to throwing some questions your way about solving that challenge of revenue. So Anna, why don't you kick us off with some brief intros, and we'll take it from there.
Well, so I joined the military straight out of high school. Angry kid. They gave me a $9.5 million aircraft and a really big gun. I mean, it really they did me a favor. Learned a lot. First female to walk in, which I generally publicly claim one of, because I don't have that in writing, and we all know the current climate we live in. So showed up, basic. They were very confused. They actually sent me back through convinced that my name must be wrong, because apparently I'm not aware of what my name is. And then walked through. AIT showed up. They had us down there were two females. One was a Chinook crew chief, and I was a Black Hawk crew chief. And they put us down in quarters 1.5 miles away from where we actually were supposed to be, next to the drill sergeants where they lived, because then nobody could get us. Whatever. Showed up at the 101st. Life was interesting. After that, actually had several tours, loved life, had my daughter, which clearly changed perspective. Got out, got my degree, ended up at JITC doing interoperability testing. So that was kind of my dose of technology. And as a test engineer, got pulled over to NAVC. So I was a GS-14 doing ordnance and explosives, which the best job in the world is when you just blow shit up all day. Everything's different every day. And if you watch somebody and you say, well, what if something goes wrong? They go, what are they gonna do? Yell at the mist? Completely amazing perspective. You ask a guy, who's the best guy you got? And they're like, do a finger count. Totally true. Going through, then started building systems and ended up, after getting recalled several times, and after my last one, ended up as an engineer at Symantec. So that was really how I dove into the cyber world. And during the interview process was asked, they said, you're my lead. Very, very quickly. But at the same time, I can turn that and have an actual conversation. So I built from there into the sales role because I was having the sales conversation anyway. But I've never sold anything. So when I went over to Akamai, I was a major account executive. I held 2 of their 3 largest accounts in public sector, and I only had 3 accounts. So I was doing a job that a 15-year sales rep should have been doing. And again, have still to this day never sold anything. So now I'm building this public sector regime, and I refuse to hire anybody who sells anything because that's not what we're here for. The one thing every person I talk to in the government or every person who's ever written me a check will tell you is I genuinely am here as a taxpayer. I am here to do the right thing for them, and I'm here to find the right solution. And if that's not me, cool. I have no problem with that. But I only choose companies I can work for that it is the right answer. It is something to bring to the table, and it's a compelling story. So I actually am going to say I grow the revenue line by not selling.
No, you definitely see that perspective, particularly when you look at it from a retention angle, right? Is you can rely on those personal relationships because you're creating value through that relationship, right? It's, you know, as people call it, the consultative sale, or just being that expert that people want to turn to. And we'll definitely would love to touch on that a bit more. I'll just briefly turn over to Andrew now for introductions, and then we can jump into some of those frameworks.
Great, thanks, Andrew Comendo, CEO of Pear Inc. So kind of started my technology career in high school building websites. I've always been a builder type, built robots also at that time. Decided to join the Air Force, went into intelligence. I did senior intelligence type work out in Guam, working China, Korea type stuff. Went and did a little JSOC stint in Iraq during transition, 2010. And then went to DIA as a humantor. So I spent about 4 years, almost 4 years at DIA active duty as a humantor. During the time, I was building a side application for augmented reality. You guys, everybody familiar with augmented reality? You know what it is now? So it used to be that I had to explain what it was. Now everybody kind of knows, which is great. So I was starting in 2010. I started writing code for an app that I needed to build. And it very quickly kind of took off when we moved here to the DC area. Our initial market was architects and engineers, so I went out cold calling for nights and weekends with a brand new baby, and I've been hung up on more than anybody other than other cold callers. And so that kind of grew from 2012, 2014. I decided to separate from the active duty at the end of 2014, went full time. Raised about $250,000 to grow my team. We launched our product to the broader market, and quickly Herman Miller, who you may be familiar with, they create furniture. They said, hey, we want to work with you to produce a consumer version, which is what we wanted to do. So very quickly we moved into the consumer space, and we were one of only 2 augmented reality applications that you could actually try furniture in your home at the right scale in real time with video. Now it's kind of, I don't want to say it's ubiquitous, but now there's a lot of those out there. From 2015 to today, we've probably had more users of our applications, so not just our original application, but the other sundry things that we've built than any other user base, right around 100 million. And right now we're going through due diligence for sale, and I'm helping the Air Force figure out their AI strategy and policy. So
Nice.
That's really cool. Don't have as an exciting resume. I'll try and jazz it up if I can.
Throwing door gunner and blowing shit up, and you're good.
When I met Anna here, I was like, the first thing I said, I've read your bio. You're a door gunner and a Black Hawk crew chief. I mean, come on. I didn't even need to be up here. So, I've done a couple things though that probably got me up here. And so I think first and foremost, I did 20 years in the Army and had a great career. Much of that career was at NSA and JSOC, for particularly JSOC, my last 6+ years. Retired and took a couple guys from JSOC. There was some technical guys there. Most of the guys that honestly that I had recruited in and had a little tech cell for them. And we started a company. It was called Human Geo. We built 2011. We built a bunch of social media capabilities and data gathering capabilities. We did a little bit of commercial work, but most of the work we did was in the government space. And then we grew for a few years and had about 200 software engineers and doing things across the IC, building mission applications and data applications. We sold in 2015. Sold into a larger group, actually. Sold the company, and then kept a piece of that. And then my management team took over the whole group, and just by sheer luck, honestly, total luck, a year later we sold the whole group again. And so I've been in a non-compete and currently been doing give back nonprofit work across 3 or 4 different areas of the community, SOF, GeoInt, and some NSA work. And so while trying to start up a small private equity firm that's working with Blackstone and a few others, and then also considering trying to maybe do a 2.0 version of what we did in the past, although I don't know if I have the energy for it, so we'll see. So that's my story so far.
Good to go. Yeah, so as you can see, several different perspectives on this overall problem of like growing the company from literally day one, or joining already something that's $3 billion market cap, but doing almost a startup within that, right, in terms of growing a federal practice. So what would you say has been the most useful or the most productive framework that you've brought to sales, or organizing sales and starting a sales engine, whether that framework comes from maybe your military background or elsewhere? What would you say is kind of your lodestone when you approach this problem? And we'll go first.
Trust. I have no interest, because I don't sell. I don't want anybody who sells. As I'm hiring, the second somebody starts talking about, well, I sold this and I did that and blah, 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 and this is this and this really sucked, but I sold it anyway. I'm like, yeah, you just wasted 20 minutes of my life I don't get back. It really comes down to not only the people I know have to trust me, I have to trust people to be able to have a conversation in the best interest of the people I'm talking to, and everyone I know who I introduce somebody to will understand that. But you also have kind of this circle around you. So there's probably about 6 people, I would say, in my circle. And it's ironic that we're all military. We didn't do that on purpose. We're all, so we've got SOF, we've got Army, we've got a SEAL, we actually do have a Marine, now that I think about it. We still like him.
Well, then you're fine. You'll be fine.
No, but those are the people who, we all do different things. We're all operating in different silos of the business, and it's not uncommon to say, hey, I just shot you an intro email. You need to go talk to so-and-so because you can help their problem. And it can be somebody where I've said, I've been trying to get that meeting for 8 months, but the second somebody they trust says, hey, this is who you have to talk to, all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, when are you available? I will clear my schedule for you. And that trust piece is a brand I think we all build based on an inherent technology, or an inherent integrity that we've all literally come from the ground up with. They talk about when you go through either your basic or your boot camp or whatever it looks like, that they break you down and rebuild you, but they build you on these foundations that I think makes you an exceptional person to work with in this field.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah.
I had some other thoughts that I wanted to throw in on that question, but I think I would dovetail onto your thoughts. I totally get what you're saying about not selling them. So I think it makes sense in the right context. But I really like what you're saying. I think for some of the folks that have gotten out recently, I think you can appreciate this idea of trust. I stole this line from somebody about 8 years ago, and I use it all the time. Being known, liked, and trusted, right? I think that is really what you're trying to achieve in the sales space and in really just any space. So for military people, I know we all think being known is like a bad thing in some ways. A lot of people, especially the Marines and some people in the Army, think to be known too much, you must be Spotlight Ranger, right? But I think in the space, being trusted is easy to understand. Being liked, you don't really have to be that liked. You just have to be liked just enough, right-ish, right? So, but getting to the known part, I think, and you put those three things together, and I think it sort of dovetails off what you said. I think that's kind of super important and super hard to do. But when you can do that well, you can do anything, not just sales. I was really going to say, like, for an opening remark on a framework, I think I wanted to pass on two lessons, one now, maybe one a little later. And I think anything I would say, anybody who's been in the military would be like, yeah, no duh, right? We all sort of know this. But I think it's really in the execution, and that is laser-like focus on sales or laser-like focus on a problem, right? Depending on what you want to point it to. And it's easy to say that. It's very, very hard to actually do. So most people who aren't that successful at trying to do something, I think, it's not necessarily, it could be a number of reasons, but one of them might just be focus and that laser-like focus in that they spend too much time optimizing on secondary, efforts that really don't make that much of a difference, and instead of focusing on the end state and the goal and staying on that. You can be a little neurotic in that process, right, and a little crazy, but oftentimes if you stay focused like that and forget about, hey, not from a non-product company perspective, let's say, not worrying about certain things that maybe are off on your website, not worrying about that white paper exactly right, or these handful of other minutia things, but focusing on operations, focusing on execution, focusing on to get to sales per se. I think that's, if you just do that, it'll probably work out. But trying to, so many other entrepreneurs I know spend too much time on the wrong things, and those are the ones that oftentimes have trouble.
So I think we're all in agreement that hardcore sales, the coffee is for closers approach, is not exactly a winning strategy in 2018. I got a little bit of a different perspective because I'm a product person first, so I'm all about building. Not to say that you're not, but the product is kind of my life, and I've never forgotten this. My dad told me when I was little, you never see a TV ad for broccoli or carrots or anything that you actually need. Like, when was the last time you saw a rice ad, right? You just haven't. It's because you need to buy rice, and you need to go buy broccoli because it's part of what you do. It's part of your life, right? So my approach to sales is create something people have to have. So I don't have to tell you about it. Your friends are going to tell you about it. You need it. When was the last time you got an ad for Gmail? Well, I guess they're around, but you were using it before they were like pushing ads hard, right? That kind of stuff. So before the sales process comes, which ends up being, especially from a product perspective, how do we get to commercialization on the enterprise side, for example? You have to get to something that people absolutely have to have. Is everybody familiar with the concept of now addictive products? Yes, no, maybe so, I don't know.
Pick your favorite app.
Right, and so there's a book out there. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's called Hooked. It's how you create addictive applications or addictive products. So you can take that two ways, right? Stuff that's bad for people, that's addictive, but very successful. Tobacco, right? Ungodly successful, not particularly good for you. I want to try to build stuff that's beneficial to your life, but is also addictive. And that's really hard to do. It's exceptionally hard to do. Following on that, though, once you have that, there is still going to be a need for you to identify people who don't know that they need what you're doing. And that's a real process. And it takes time, and you have to really understand your market and where your future markets could be. And that takes a lot of focus, to your point, on understanding who your current customers are and how you turn current customers into future potential customers for new products, things like that.
No, that's spot on. We have that conversation almost every day in terms of how do you get to know your customers. So that was pretty much the next thing I was going to talk about, because the sales engine can look different, right? Depending whether it's a product company or a services company, whether it's an outbound model or an inbound model. There's going to be ways there's pros and cons to each of those, but it's going to be dependent on what the ultimate value is. But one thing that every business has in common, right, is the customer, right? It's not a business without the customer. So in that sense, going on these themes of being that trusted entity and getting to know the customer, what have you seen as the highest value or the most productive ways to get to know that customer?
So I was raised as a military brat, and one of the things I think we've all seen across the military is there are people who come in and out of your life who, when they're there, they are absolutely part of your community, and when they leave, it's almost like they're just, they're still here, they're still your family, they're still all of those things, but you can go 20 years without talking to somebody who's been in that community, and they walk in and it's like they never left. So that's how I was raised, and that has been a real shortcoming, actually, as I come into this space, because I come into the government, and the government folks without the military expertise or without that sense of community where you can come and go and still be part of it, they don't understand that. So one of the things I've done strategically to help me is I literally have 2 days, and I alternate what days they are on the calendar every month, where I sit it down and I say, I'm going to touch every person in my network. I'm going to go around and say, hey, how are you and the kids? What's going on? What's coming up next? Is there anything that I can either help find you somebody to do, whatever you need? What are your problems and how can I help you solve them, even if it's not me, especially if it's not me? And that then is how you reinforce that with people who kind of don't get it. And that has been something I have literally, and I'm not hyper-organized in any capacity, but that's one of the things I have had to be almost, we'll call it militaristic on, is that has had to be, that day in my calendar is the one thing that I can't give up on. And from that perspective, when I move companies, I would get calls from people saying, hey, now that you're not with, I just left Akamai, now that you're not with Akamai, let me tell you what really happened there. Let me tell you what's really going on over here. Let me tell you about this thing over there and where we think you could help. Or do you know anybody who could do X, Y, or Z? And those are people who, that relationship was maybe 2 years old. But as soon as you move roles and they say, how can I get help with something that has nothing to do with you, you've now reinforced it to a point that those people will stay in, you're now part of their community. But it has been something I have literally had to schedule.
Got it. An interesting trait, right? And something we'll get to a little bit later.
Know your
is in terms
weaknesses.
of, yeah, exactly.
I guess there's a distinction between keeping customers and finding new ones, right? And
Right.
especially in the kind of life cycle of a company or a product, it's a kind of odd, especially in technology, where technologists tend to build and then find customers, which ends up being very painful if you don't know what you're doing, or if you don't already have a pretty good read on that market.
Yeah,
So for example,
product market fit. Yeah, oh yeah.
right. So if you don't, I see this a lot in companies I do due diligence for, and it's, okay, tell me again what exactly, who's your user? Like who's actually using your stuff? And the answer is, well, we're going to find, it's going to be this, and the market cap and the total available market is this. And I say, hey, that's dynamite. You didn't answer my question. Tell me who your actual customer is. And then there's a whole lot of this kind of thing. So I think all the way from identifying that customer who you're going to bring them a new product to, all the way through keeping them, becomes a super tight, and I think the group will appreciate this, OODA loop, right? Of talking to them about how is the product working for you today? How can it work better for you tomorrow? And then we're going to continue to repeat that on a repetitive cycle, kind of like what you're talking about. You gotta hit them up all the time. And if you're not doing that, you're going to go out of business. If you're not doing that, your product's going to fail. People are going to stop using your stuff.
Well, and it's a small community, and they're buying, part of what they're buying is you. So even if you're moving companies, if you're moving, the technologies I'm in today versus what I was in yesterday versus before are three very, very different things. So that transition, it's a small community. Those people come back to me because I've figured out exactly how to be part of that community.
Well, and even in non-small
no, it says you're
communities,
switching, yeah.
let's say you're building products for hundreds of millions of people or tens of millions of people. Obviously, you can't talk one-to-one, but what you can do is you can start building mechanisms and that you get feedback. One of the biggest pieces of feedback you can get as a product designer is people not using your stuff or stopping using your stuff.
Right.
And then you need to be able to understand, okay, where are my touch points so that I can investigate that? So I agree with you in that point, but that once you get past a certain scale where you can do one-to-one, then there are new techniques you need to do, but you always have to have in mind, I need to be building that feedback loop all the time. And if you cannot build a feedback loop, then you can't succeed. I mean, if people will not give you feedback, then you don't have a product.
There's a reason every time you get out of an Uber or a Lyft, it asks you to rate your driver.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I could just add more like a cherry on top of that, well, not much to add. I think that, alternatively, I've also, for the last 7 years, I've had a relationship with a big company called Kairosoft in the area, and they do about, $5 billion of federal sales. So I'm one of their IC consultants and special operations consultants. And so I've met with Akamai, I've met with Symantec over the years, hundreds of other companies. And you know what, I see a trend in the sales force. It's the sales force that supports the federal government side. For all these Silicon Valley companies, it's all interconnected. It's just as if you're a DIA employee or an NGA employee or in some space around the federal space or your own community, there's the same thing going on in the federal space, and they jump from company to company. So you talk to somebody, one year he's at Splunk, the next year the individual's at Akamai. And so I think some of the things I've learned from that and advising those folks how to break in is, I think, much like what was already said. And I think it does come down to trust. It does come down to being able to get access to those customers and that feedback loop and trying to have the right capability with connecting to the right customer set. But then once you get it in there, what you find is you get calls from company X and company Y. We've got this $6 million sale. It's been there for 2 years, but they want to kill it now. And it's oftentimes because of the feedback loop that you spoke about, the continued trust relationships that you've spoken about. And I think that's the hard part in some of these Silicon Valley style companies. They sell in very well, and then many of them are not keeping the touch points, right? Because the sales is oftentimes disconnected from the service in such a way that, hey, I got my commission if you're at Splunk or something like that. And then even if you really care, it's oftentimes another organization doing the implementation. So I think connecting those two dots, if you're a big product company selling to the federal government and keeping the feedback loop and the trust up is easy to say and do. It's easy to say, very hard to do again, right? So I think those are great lessons you guys pointed out.
So can I ask you a question
Yeah.
to the audience?
Sure.
So, who's doing something in consumer or wants to do something in consumer? Like, if you can just raise your hand. Sound guy.
Yeah, I know we got one guy here. Yeah, we can see that. There
And
you go.
You're the only one? Everybody else wants to sell or
Come on,
does
you
sell
got
to
to
the
pitch
federal
flat.
government?
I'm sorry, we got to pitch Flask Cap. 20-second pitch. Seth.
He's
Seth,
got a
by the way,
timer
yeah.
going, so he's not kidding.
So I am not a tech guy. Full disclosure here. But no, I'm in a consumer product. We make a product. I'm an advisor, an investor in a product that we physically make and we sell. And we use Shopify, and I was showing these guys the beauty of how we communicate with our customers. So
Yeah, I
I
asked.
appreciate that on a smaller scale. So who owns a Yeti? Okay.
Who wants to own a Yeti? I do.
Yeah, sales guy.
Yeah, so who owns a Yeti? Who likes to drink spirits? I know we're drinking beer
Yeah,
tonight.
sure.
Well, a friend of mine invented it's the first ever flask for your tumbler. And it holds 5 ounces of booze, and every time you press a button, it discreetly dispenses directly into your drink. So
Discreetly.
it's eliminating carrying the big Yeti cooler to the beach. You just bring your drink, you put it in your backpack, and go. Or if you're a soccer mom, you just got a little bit more. Anyways, neat
So
product.
yeah, next vet and tet event, we'll have them at the door. Pass them out
No,
for
but
sure.
Understanding the product, all the customer feedback, all that stuff's relevant. We're looking at that at real time, all day long. Good, bad, or ugly, incentivizing through reviews. Go to our website, and then now we're looking for other applications of our patent, which we just got issued. So it's kind of cool.
So the reason I ask is because
But not technical.
yeah, some of these answers can be very applicable for consumer, like in my case, may not be applicable at all in the federal space. They may be very applicable in the federal space, not at all in consumer. So I think these are all,
Sure, yeah,
I think
enterprise and consumer is gonna-
the way that we're
right.
kind of talking about this, I think there are wins in all of them, and understanding your specific niche
Right.
on what it is that's where you're gonna drive the benefit.
Right, and to stay on those kinds of themes that do have applicability in both those worlds, right? Whether it's enterprise/federal or consumer. One other challenge, when it's a good problem to have, but when you start to scale that revenue and you start to see whether it's the customer feedback, product feedback come in the door, certainly something I've seen firsthand is, okay, well now how do you meet that demand, right? And so you look to grow teams. And so I'm curious to hear from you all. We've talked about a couple traits or must-haves, but how do you approach building that team, right? If again, whether that's drawing on your veteran experience or not, but what are one or two, must-haves when it comes to growing in line with the revenue?
So I currently have 3 recs open because that's the hardest thing I face. I can put partner agreements in place. I've been at the company for 4 months, and I've brought our revenue up 480% in public sector, which anybody who's ever sold anything in public sector understands that is not normal. And those were literally, I had a deal cradle to grave 5 weeks, unheard of in the public sector space. So I can grow revenue. I can absolutely turn around and grow partner agreements and go enable people to go sell, and I can train them. I can turn around and handle the technical side. Finding the right people is the hardest challenge I face today. Because I don't hire salespeople. If somebody walks in and tries to sell me on their Rolodex, I don't care. I would much rather have somebody who's going to go try to do the right thing for a customer, and I'll help them get the meeting, or I will find somebody who will help them get the meeting, than somebody who's going to turn around and say, I have these 60 people in my Rolodex, which means I don't know how to talk to anybody else, but I can bullshit the hell out of 60 people. So that is my biggest challenge, actually.
Interesting.
And since we don't have salespeople, we have technical account managers. Every salesperson I have has to be able to do a demo. They have to be able to do a deep dive. They have to jump in and be able to fill out an RFI and RFP, which when I was an engineer, that's exactly what I did. But I can't think of, in the Symantec federal engineering space, I probably had 40 engineers. I can't think of a single one of them that I can now transition over to walk through and have the business conversation also. So that really is the hardest thing I look for.
Yeah, you definitely that model, start with Oracle, and another recent example of Palantir now is that kind of that field engineering /sales is absolutely a high demand, low density type of billet.
Well, the cloud is changing the market space.
Yeah.
If you look around, the cloud, all of the cloud providers are coming up with their own. You've got the marketplaces, you've got all of those things. So it's going to become a point where the cloud provider is now, if you go to Safeway and they only have a certain brand of groceries, you learn how to buy their brands and you learn how to fill your cart and you leave. You don't have to have somebody walk you through and explain to you what the produce is. So it's the exact same concept where if you then go to Giant or you go to Harris Teeter, like they're all known for slightly different things. The cloud service providers, as we're migrating that way, are kind of making the salesperson less important, but the technical person is incredibly important.
Yep.
And the salesperson gets a meeting and the technical person walks in and really closes the deal because they can show you what you're going to do with it. So we're just eliminating kind of that first step, but finding a technical person who can do both of those things. Somebody told me I'm looking for unicorns, and I corrected them and said, no, I'm looking for leprechauns riding unicorns.
Right.
Well, to that point, one of the last points there, so in the kind of really hardcore tech side of things, we don't want to hire salespeople. We don't want to even do sales.
Yeah.
We want to put up a landing page and everybody just bombs it and uses our product. And I never have to go and do the sales call. Now that works on the early days, but it stops working once you get to a certain scale, right? And so when you're looking at getting into enterprise or government space from the consumer side, I look at it as a human tour. I'm recruiting, right? So the top 3 jobs for a CEO are keep the money funded, so raise money. Number 2 is recruitment. Number 3 is vision. You could kind of swap some of these. But recruitment is one of the top 3 tasks you have as a CEO. And I looked at it like I did when I was a human tour. I'm going to look at my sources and then try to recruit them. And I think that it's really key that so I'll give you an example from our life. I'm not a furniture guy. Couldn't care less, quite frankly, about like furniture design. However, our primary market was furniture because that's what our application did. So I went out there and I found the best damn furniture dude I could find who knew everybody already, who could tell me what I didn't know, who could do all of that work for me. And then I start them off with, look, you bring me deals, you get cash. It's a cash transaction. But also that he's got buy-in to what we're doing, so he doesn't go out there doing the hard pitch. It's literally we hired this guy, and he'd been in furniture for like 30 years. And if you looked at him, if he walked in around tech circles, people would be like, who's this kind of graybeard? And he got exactly what we were doing immediately and loved it and started showing it off on his phone to everybody he could see. Well, clearly he already bought in, so now all I got to do is pay him to bring me leads. And so that's what we did in that case. And from that kind of single point of entry, we grew that space around that in different sub-market segments of furnishings.
Cool.
Even though I was going out to all the conferences too, I'd get a call, he'd say, hey, I'm here with the head of this organization. Come meet them and talk with them about what we do. So pick up, walk over there. I come and do this, meet and greet, sign the check, off to the next one. And he's out there doing those hits. So again, I go back to
Part of your circle.
Yeah, I go back to it's that trust relationship, but also where you're starting counts. If you're starting in consumer and you need to go to enterprise, that's a transition. If you're starting enterprise and you need to go to consumer, the sales process has to transition.
You've already got that credibility.
Yeah, exactly, right. And actually that's a good point in that solidifying credibility in a really hard to capture place is really important for other third order groups like investors, for example. Say you want to go out and get an A round, B round, C round, whatever it is. Well, maybe not C, but A round, B round. If you can come and say, look, I already have a customer set. I already have salespeople inside XYZ market with a TAM of 15 billion. They're going to be a lot more interested to see the ball roll from there as a spread out. In fact, go talk to Lightspeed Venture Partners, go talk to Greylock, go talk to Sequoia, whatever. They're going to demand that you already have a market entry point into a 1+ or 10+ billion dollar market. Because if you start there, then you can work down and hit all the other kind of dogs and cats.
Yep.
Well, I don't think I want to add too much more, but I may take a risk and just tell you a very short story just to liven up the crowd a little bit, right? So
Nice.
if you bear with. So what Andrew was saying about different skill sets combining in some ways reminded me just now of a Diane Rehm NPR show where she was about 5 years ago, where she was interviewing Terrence Morrow, right? We all know Terrence Morrow, AKA Ice-T, right? And and she was like, Ice, baby, how do you know the difference between, you're an old school rapper, how do you know who are these new late 90s, 2000s rappers how do you know 50 Cent is good or bad, right? And he said, Diane, baby, of course, game knows game. And what he meant by that is kind of what I think Andrew was saying, the combination of putting really experienced engineers, if you will, with subject matter experts together, right? One expert can identify another expert, and when So Ice-T can tell you that 50 cent is good, right? Andrew is an expert in technology and application development. He goes out and finds the best furniture guy, and then they build this great app. But I think that's just kind of the way once you recognize that you don't have all the skill sets, but you're smart enough to recognize that talent in others, and when you can pull that together, that's where you get a heavy lift. I know we're kind of off topic on sales, but I think the couple things you said, made me, want to see if I could get a couple chuckles out of you on the iced tea analogy. So turn it back to you, Art.
No, thank you. And actually, I think it's about time we turn it over to the audience for some more discussion and questions. Would love to hear, whether it's specifically about revenue or otherwise. Would love to hear from the audience if they have any questions for our panel.
Can we actually ask who's small, medium, and large? Can we
Yeah,
identify
absolutely.
that first?
Quick survey.
So who's small business?
So focused on the SMB, you mean?
Yeah.
As far as customers go? Or
Associated.
who is a
Absolutely.
small business? Is that what you're asking?
Either
I
one,
mean,
probably.
kind of both, yeah.
Okay.
So a handful.
Yes, so we got a few. Who's medium?
Mid-size, mid-market.
And who's large?
And you're not in
So
business,
we're
apparently.
a little bit of both. All right.
Well, so
All
what are
right.
the other
Focus
options?
on.
Because some people weren't, who's doing it?
Yeah, Aspire, right?
Aspire.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
It's in the
well then you're
plan.
emerging. So who's emerging? We'll go with that too. All right, so we've got a few emerging.
So I guess I'm interested. I mean, 400 and what'd you say %? That's massive growth.
480% in 4 months in the Fed space,
Yeah,
and
that's
all new
fantastic.
business.
Yeah. Maybe a couple decades. So take. So that's it. That's it, man. Those numbers getting bigger. How do you? I mean, that is massive growth to achieve in such a short period of time. How did you get to that growth? What was you've talked a lot about your trusted network. How did you leverage your trusted network? And then I'm certain there's got to be some great engineering involved in some of this. So that's just amazing growth.
Well, so one of the larger customers I brought in was Homeland Security, but it was a very niche group called NCATS under MPPD. So NCAT's job is to do critical infrastructure scanning for any business that falls under a critical infrastructure flag, but they have to opt in. So you have airlines, you have banks, you have energy sector, you have all of these different pieces, and there are about probably, I'd say, 6,000 identified as critical infrastructure, where if something happened to them, it impacts a certain percentage of the country. So they have 400 customers currently. They are using our primary competitor. And I went to them and I asked them, I said, where do you want your mission to go? And it was people I'd never met before, but it was somebody who I was able to say, hey, so-and-so brought me in to do this stuff for Akamai. I'm here now, but I understand your mission. So doing the research is important, right? If you don't know the mission, if anybody walks in here and sits here and says, I have no idea what anybody military does, I'm pretty sure nobody's really going to be handing out cards, right? Like there's going to be why would you walk into a room at a Vets in Tech event and know nothing about the military, whether you served or not, right? You know nothing. So if you walk in and say, look, I understand your mission, I understand what you're doing, where do you want to go? And they turn around and say, you know what, here's where we're at, we started with this really small budget, here's where we want to go, and we're finally getting money. Okay, well, what if I could find a program for you that has extra money coming on the end of the year, and what if we could help leverage what you want with what they can pay for and could eventually use? I mean, match made in heaven, right? So that's how I ended up doing that. I actually was able to split. It'll end up being a $2 million deal, but it was a little over $500K, about $550, over 2 separate contracts, and we were able to figure out the procurement side of the house to run it as tools instead of services, so they didn't have to compete, and that's how we were able to close it in 5 weeks.
Can I do a follow-up question?
Yeah, go for it.
So what is it that you guys are reading about growing top-line revenue or sales cycles or methodologies, right? There's so many principles out there. There's so many, thoughts that you can follow, whether it's BAN or whether it's MedPick or whether it's, the salmon principle or whether it's this principle. So what is it that you're thinking about that you've latched onto that you like? What are you taking and melding that you're owning? right? As you think about your process, right? So we had all these terms and processes in the Marine Corps, and the civilian world has a lot of great terms and processes too. So what can you find, take, and mash up that's been helpful in as you've grown your businesses?
None of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I have a short
Zero.
attention
Well,
span.
yeah, I mean,
I read
it-
a bunch of stuff and it
Sure.
works or it doesn't.
I would-
It applies or it
I-
doesn't.
I'll maybe offer the sort of in an opposite way, if you will. Like this is avoiding the question but answering it in a different way. I think. So I think I maybe have some working with all those sales reps over the years at Kairosoft. I think there's maybe some advice for sales folks who are maybe not getting a bunch of sales. And so what do? You're coming out of the military. You go into a sales organization. That was sort of supposed to be the topic of.
That was
the
my
panel,
that was
and
my
yours-
culminating
and
question.
You're
but yeah.
supposed to give some advice on what do we do if we're in a sales organization, military guys, and how do we get involved, and how do we don't have any sales and we don't want to get canned, right? So I think you think about, so I think one of the lessons I would take from General McChrystal, Admiral McCraven, was it's better to be a zealot than a martyr, right? And so often used quote in JSOC, and so you don't want to be the martyr getting fired a year later because you didn't meet numbers. Well, so let's say you don't meet numbers. There are other things a young military officer or enlisted can do in a sales environment to be successful. I think you probably already know these better than I do, and I think that's things like. Of course, I was a service guy, but my experience with products is like, hey, are you aligned with your battalion commander like you should be aligned with your VP of sales, right? For his or her strategic goals. Are you doing forecasting that's in a trustworthy manner, right? Are you showing that you're a winner, or even if you haven't got sales, right? Are you doing all the right things in that organization to qualify and register and do all those things? So I think if you're doing that and being a good teammate, you expand your opportunity to learn and grow in the first years out of the military, right? Especially, and even after, to be able to get to a sales cycle where you're winning, right? I know sales way better than I do, so I didn't want to hit any. I don't think anybody up here wants to compete with you on that question. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my answer is don't join a company with shitty products.
Yeah.
Don't start a company and make a shitty product.
Because then you have to sell.
Because then you have to sell.
It's
Don't
true.
fucking sell. Create kick-ass stuff that people demand, like the end. And then you need to support them, right? So the sales side of things, I mean, I think we get all wrapped up around terms all the time. This is like everything in life, right? So, I think a big piece that you were trying to point out is big S, Glengarry, Glen Ross sales is whatever, right? But sales in terms of customer relationships, understanding your problems, all the rest of that is mandatory from day one as you start the product development life cycle. At the point in which you're out there having to tell people why your stuff is useful, you kind of already lost. You could still make money, right? You could still make money, but you're not going to make a multi-billion-dollar company doing that.
There's a few counterexamples to that, that come to mind, like Salesforce or.
No, so Salesforce had a kick-ass. No.
Right.
Salesforce had a kick-ass CRM that we needed to use, and in fact, today still Salesforce has the best enterprise integrated product management suite that does about 1 billion different things. So in fact, I just consulted with a group that was looking to grow it's effectively a real estate services business where they asked me to come in and talk to them about, look, what we do is, so you want to build something, but you got a bunch of permits. This is like in Houston. You got to do permits, like you have 15 different permits, state, local, municipal, whatever. Pain in the ass. But if I could just hire somebody to do all those for me, that'd be great. So
Passports work that way now, too.
So they wanted to do that. And so they came to me and said, look, we have too much going on. We're like driving 15, different times a day, all this kind of stuff. How do we make this work? The answer is Salesforce has a turnkey solution for that with automation.
So
right?
does TurboTax.
Right.
I mean,
all
things
these.
we use
Let's
all
into
the
it,
time.
right? And
Absolutely.
so the point is, once you have actually built products, you may have to go and talk about them to people. That's going to be true. But if that is your only way to win clients or to win sales, win money, so to speak, then you're already starting at a little bit of a deficit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't know if I agree with that. I
Are you-
mean,
yeah.
I take your point on the $1 billion company thing. I mean,
Well, that's what
you
we're
made
here
some
for.
you made some really good points. I'm not, but I would say it's been my experience with hundreds of other companies that are selling in the federal government that it actually does require a lot of awareness,
Yeah.
product creation, integration, trust, all these things that we've
does,
sort of all
absolutely.
talked about, right? And continuing
But
interaction.
that's how you
to get those
become
sales,
what
yeah.
they need.
And smaller companies, let's say, you know, it could be a $20 million company in products, it could be a $100 million company. Those companies need massive amount of awareness, right? I always say, when I see a $20, $30 million product company that's being helped by Kairosoft, I go, oh shit, there's only one sales gal, there's only one sales guy, and these guys are covering the entire IC or the entire Defense Department. I'm like, there's not enough time that individual has really no hope unless he has the next, like working at Cisco in '99 in a company that has the hottest product, or working at Splunk in the last 5 years, or some of these companies that have these hot products and you're on the right time wave. So I think it takes a lot of customer interaction to be able to continue to sell if you're not on that, like you're saying, that $1 billion cycle, right?
So I'm going to tie those together because I think one of the things we're both hearing is on both sides of the spectrum, small business and large business. And one of the things that a smaller business has to do is figure out how to maximize their reach. And that's one of the things Kairosoft and the distributors do, right? Kairosoft, DLTs, MX Group, and the Fed space, those are kind of the guys who do that. So you turn around and they are not going to walk in and do a demo. Like that's not how they're built. But they are going to sit there because they are 24 years old and they are really vying for that Letterman jacket and their name up on the board. Like whatever the prize is, they're a very, very prize-oriented organization, and that's what makes them efficient. They will pound a list all day long. They will market it. They will send it out there. They'll do all the things that as a small business you can't afford to do because you don't scale, right? In the federal space, me building this business, I don't scale. So I have to understand, how do I get a Kairosoft, which actually that is our primary distributor, so I love them to death, but
distributors, channels. Yeah.
how do I leverage their reach to go out and hit the things I can't? And they're going to go kind of hit, and I turn lists over to them all the time. I went to Dotus, I came out with 150 actually qualified leads, which the closest I heard to that was somebody came out with 3, so I think we did very well. We pitched the bottom 100 to Kairosoft, and then we turned around and followed up on the ones that we felt were more highly qualified. And a lot's come out of that. But you have to figure out how to make it scale, but also turn around and be able to tell an actual story. You can't have somebody who all they know how to do is pound the phone for 10 companies tell your story. Because people are not buying widgets unless they understand them. And at the level they write checks, you're talking maybe 20% understand what you're talking about. The other 80%, you have to be able to appeal to the business side of the house and the story side of the house. And that's one of the reasons that, I've been put in the roles I've been in is because I did come from a technical background. I can have that conversation without saying, well, let me get an engineer. They'll answer your questions. Yeah, nobody wants to hear that crap. They want to hear that you know what you're talking about, but more importantly, you've done the research to understand what they need.
Right, understanding the pain point. Any other question? Yeah.
He had one.
Oh, in the back. Well, let's go to Jeff and then if someone else.
Did you?
So it seems like there's a bit of a theological question about whether you should have sales at all. But assuming that you do have to hire sales, if you have, as currently I am the sales and kind of everything else, do you have any suggestions on when to hire, what things you're looking for to hire that first salesperson?
I already mentioned I suck at that, so.
Well, just to be clear, I'm not saying you don't need sales. I'm saying it should not be the primary driver of everything you do, right? But to your answer, like for me, when we started hiring sales, was when I got out of my depth on understanding the market that we were in. Specifically, we had products that were working, and a customer set that came in that said, "Hey, we want to do this," and I said, "All right, look, we will work with you, but I need to give you somebody who you can interact with that speaks your same language,
Right.
because I'm not going
To
to
tell
quite
your story.
to help translate for me what you need, because I'm also running engineering and finance and legal stuff and all the other duties, that
In the
kind of
Fed
stuff.
space, you have a lot of retired folks who are walking around saying, I know these programs and I know these people. And I don't hire those people, but I will absolutely put them in as a 1099 for a strategic approach. You know, if you want to go after, Palantir did this beautifully until they stopped doing it, right? You know, it's one of those things where if you have one of these programs, you have to know the program to get in. If that's not where you're weak, then hire somebody who does, but do it as a 1099 and say, you know what, I'm going to give you this much, but if you win, I'll give you this much. Because there are a lot of people who say they can get there and they're just never going to deliver.
Yeah.
So that's risk mitigation on both sides.
I like your example with Palantir. I think they definitely had some great advantages that most companies just can't do. I mean, they were willing to spend so much money to do that, and it worked for them, obviously. But most companies can't pull off putting deployed engineers in there, you know, without, you know, covering their costs, right? And I think they were, I mean, they pulled off one of the best coups in the last decade, right, in doing that. So that good for those guys. I think that's a good example of doing it really well too. I would say, just to Jeff, right, I sort of disagree a little bit with some of the points that they made on, I believe in Salesforce. I don't think anybody at Splunk or Akamai or Symantec, you know, would Symantec have what, 50, 100 salespeople? I mean, I don't think they would be getting their sales on a great product if they didn't, Symantec, if they didn't have hundreds of salespeople, right? And I don't think you'd disagree with that. I do think
the engineers are who closed.
Yeah, and I do think Akamai struggles, as an example, because they do not have enough sales folks, and
100%.
they have a couple of deployed engineers that sort of do some good things at times, but they can't cover. They don't have the bandwidth. But Akamai has some products that just, you know, if you I got to have it, right? So in some cases,
I did $12 million
right?
last year at Akamai, by the way, as a sales rep.
Yeah, so I think some of that stuff goes to the point where it can sell itself, right? 12 million in Akamai is awesome, right?
Well, like Google has a huge sales force. Like, let's not
No,
let's
Google,
not get excited here.
AWS.
Google
like,
has
you,
a massive
you pick a
sales
CSP,
force.
they are saturating the market.
And it's to sell AdWords, right? Because they're hitting people constantly with AdWords. They're not selling you on products as users. They're selling you to advertisers.
They're selling clicks.
Yeah, I mean, my only point where I disagree with you guys, and probably not fundamentally with you, it's just that you have to have, right?
Absolutely.
gotta
No,
have
you
the
do.
stuff.
And honestly, that was one of my problems at Akamai, was the fact that they didn't
Yeah.
feel that the sales force was valued. So
Right,
if you brought in a big deal, they're like, well, the engineers closed it. So, you know,
Right.
and
Yeah, right.
you know, that was kind of a thing. But at Symantec, it was definitely, you have 250 point products who half the time are competing with themselves. They're not going to make the investment over to the Fed space, and your engineers are the only ones who can spell them all, let alone understand what half of them are. And they walk in, you get the meeting, let's figure it out and close it. The sales rep was responsible for directing the engineer to figure out what avenue to walk down. And honestly, that was hugely integral, because if you walk in and talk about 250 things, nobody cares.
So I'm going to, last call for questions from the audience. If anyone had anything else they wanted to
Well,
lob
if
over.
we're closing out, I do want to remind everyone of this. Yeah, so, you know, I don't know how many people have seen this around the DoD and IC all the last 20 years, right? And, you know, I was sitting, somebody shot it to me recently, and a good friend of mine who built Silent Circle, built SOC before that, now runs this program, Data Tribe, right? Yeah, he's a SEAL as well, and I was up in his office recently, and he's like, "Al, you do know where this came from, right?" And I'm like, "No, it's all over NSA. It's one of my favorite cartoons for the last 20 years." He goes, "Al, this came from SEAL Team," and sadly I've forgotten, SEAL Team 2 or 6 or so, not 6, 2 or 5, and in the Vietnam era, and they had T-shirts, and so and so I think it always struck me that this probably should be on every sales guy and gal's notebook somewhere, or wherever they go, you know.
Well, on that note, you know, Al shared some brief wisdom with us previously, and now illustrated it. If Anna and Andrew, real quick, because the point was made, the bar is still open. Parting words of wisdom or advice for a veteran who's either transitioning or getting started in a revenue role or starting in an emerging company. What would you say? Like, just
leverage the hell out of the fact that the veteran community is strong. You walk in, you immediately have a credibility that nobody else has. So leverage it, network, turn around and say, how do I become part of that circle? Where do I help strengthen what you're trying to do, and what can you do for me?
Cool.
I'd say if you're gonna take any two things from me, it's be the absolute expert in your customer, whatever their problem is, and how they do their work, and what you're giving them, what you're selling, what the product is. So you need to be the best on the planet on both of those things. Like, they should be like, holy shit, I didn't even know I had that problem. Like, wow, you understand my business processes better than I do, or better than we do. Oh, and this solves business problems I didn't even know I had. So if you can do two things on that side, generally applicable to the business just everywhere.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to thank our panel. I appreciate the time and wisdom you've spent with us tonight. And by all means, we'll be sticking around for a bit. The bar is still open. But thank you for joining, and thank you, panelists.
Nice to meet you again.